So thanks for signing on. My name's Danae. I am a solutions consultant in the Atlanta area. Most of you I have met, some of you haven't, but we're going to just be going over just the basic funding process of getting a device, and then also report writing tips for you all, as that can be pretty daunting. So let's dive in and get started. Let's see. All right, so basically, if you feel like this with report writing, you're not alone. But my goal by the end of this is to have you feeling like this. So that is my goal for today, and to make it a little bit easier for you. So kind of what we're going to be looking over today is the evaluation and funding process, what paperwork is required for this process, and then report writing examples. I have tons of examples for you, and then I will give you all of the resources from this PowerPoint so that you can look over it and use it for at your disposal. Okay, so the funding process, this is kind of how it breaks down in my head. I'm a linear person, I'm a visual person, so this is how I see it. So as an SLP, you are determining that your patient is a good candidate for a speech generating device. You've probably gone through low tech options, mid tech. You've probably tried, obviously, speech therapy to try with speech first, and maybe you aren't getting anywhere. And so you're thinking your patient's a good candidate for a device. So you request an evaluation. So in my territory, I've been helping a lot with these evaluations, and I have SLPs in this territory who are really well versed in this, and they don't even need me at all. And then I have some that they've never done one before, so they want a lot of support, which is totally fine. So it's totally up to you how you want to run that. So you request an evaluation, you would call me or email me. We would set up a time where ourselves and the parents and whoever wants to be there is involved. You write a report recommending this device, so we're going to go over that in a few minutes. And then I always tell SLPs, look at your report as kind of a rough draft, especially if you're just getting started with this process. I mean, a lot of us are type A, I think, and we want it to be perfect, but just look at it as a rough draft. We just want to make sure it's following Medicare guidelines, basically. But so you're going to submit paperwork to the funding department, or we will do that. And then if there's any edits that need to be done, if it's not following Medicare guidelines, like say for instance, you're recommending one type of or an amount in one area, but then you don't mention amount in another area, we could come back and say, hey, like this is kind of conflicting. Are you recommending amount? Like, what are we looking at? So those are type of things that we're looking for. And then we submit this to insurance for you, and then we wait for the device to be approved and shipped. So that's kind of the linear process of how it works. And then we'll talk about the necessary paperwork for that. So there is client information forms. This looks like this. And this is something I've been doing at time of evaluation with the patient and the family. I like to do this with the patient and the family at the time of eval so that nobody has to really worry about it, because it can be, I mean, the whole process is overwhelming, I think, for everybody, especially the patient and the family who have never been through it. So I try to help support them as much as possible. And so I've been filling this out at time of eval with the family. So that's why I have my name next to it. But the release of benefits, this is what it looks like. This is a legal document, so it has to be filled out correctly, or else insurance will not approve the device. So we're pretty picky about the way this is filled out. And so I've been filling it out at time of eval with the patient and family as well, so that I make sure that it's filled out correctly. But it's like just little things that we watch for so that it doesn't get kicked back by insurance. And then the quote, I do that as well. And then you have insurance cards, front and back. So I get copies of that from the patient and family as well. And then if there is an IEP, so like for those kiddos in school who have an IEP, if you're working with the parents and you want to prep them, maybe you already have that on file with your clinic. or if you're at the school, you already have that on file. But we just need a copy of that. So if you want to communicate that to the parents, they can bring it, or we just need a copy. So the SLP report, I star that because that is the main thing that you are responsible for to write. And I will say this, there's been questions, I guess, in the past, and I don't know, this is just what I heard when I started with this company is companies out there, or I don't know who it was, but they would write the report for the SLP. I think that was common practice, but just know that I will never write a report for you. I don't want to write the report for you, and so that is totally up to you. I'm here to support you and help you, but I will never write a report for you. Face-to-face notes. So when we're prepping with the family, every patient who needs a speech generating device needs to meet with their doctor within the last 6 months. This is called face-to-face notes, and the doctor typically is the one who's overseeing their diagnosis. So if they have ALS or whatever that diagnosis is, the doctor needs to have a face-to-face appointment with the family within the last 6 months of them getting this device. And we have more specific notes on that I communicate to the family at time of eval too. And then the prescription from the doctor, our funding team takes care of this for you. So you don't have to worry about getting the prescription. Again, some SLPs they want to get their own prescription, and that is totally fine. It does speed up the process, I'll tell you that, but we definitely take care of it for you. If you've never done that before, that is totally fine. So let's talk about the report. So our company just recently, I want to say about 2 weeks ago, released 6 reports that were specific to diagnosis, and this was awesome. If you haven't seen them, or if you need them, I have them, but at the end I will send all of this information to you, and these will be part of it. But these are diagnosis specific. So if you're an SLP that's working with kids with autism, your report is going to look very, very different than an adult CVA or ALS patient. And so these reports have to look very different. They can't be one template, because one template does not fit every diagnosis and every recommendation out there. So this is a really great tool for SLPs to work from, because it gives them a general guideline to follow and just gets you thinking in the right direction. It's definitely not going to give you, obviously, your specific patient's needs and what happened in the eval, but it is an awesome starting point. And then at the bottom there, I put the link to our eFunding website, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. So this eFunding website, it hasn't been fully released, I should say. It's kind of in, I guess, experimental mode, if you want to say, but it's being used by some SLPs, so it's definitely live enough for if you want to get on and use it, you're more than welcome. But they're still kind of working out the kinks and changing some things, but it is out there if you wanted to use it and learn from it. I've been using it a ton as SLPs, they have questions for me. I go onto that website and I find the specific area that they're asking me about, and I just copy and paste directly from that website, like a specific example. It's been a really useful tool, and I think it's going to be an awesome tool for SLPs who are writing reports. It's really nice. So the first part of the report is all the demographics. So this is pretty self-explanatory, but you're just listing all of the information about the patient, their date of birth, their diagnosis, their insurance, their doctor, and then your information. You have the date of eval and also the date of report. The date of eval, obviously, so you're like, if we did an eval today, it would be today's date, and then the date of the report is usually when you finish the report. I have some SLPs who make the date of eval and date of report the same thing, so that's kind of a variable. When we get to the doctor prescription part, and this is really specific, the date of the doctor's prescription has to be after the date of the report, because if you think of in insurance's eyes, everything needs to follow a timeline. So if somebody goes to the doctor and they talk to the doctor about, hey, I have this kid with autism and we want a speech generating device. In a perfect world, this is how things would go. The doctor would say, okay, in my note today, I'm going to write that they want a speech generating device. Okay, they go see a speech therapist. The speech therapist does the eval, sends the report back to the doctor. The doctor looks through it and then writes his prescription. So like if you think of it in a linear fashion like that, that's why that date of report has to be before the doctor writes his prescription, if that makes sense. So the next part is communication impairment. So what type of impairment do they have? So Medicare guidelines, it has to be categorized as a severe disorder. So severe expressive aphasia. The word severe has to be in there. It cannot be moderate to severe. It cannot be moderate. It has to be severe. If they've had a previous device, why is it not medically working anymore? So insurance, and some of you may know this, insurance will cover a new device every 5 years. So if you are, 5 years and this device is still working great for them, that's great. They can still use it. But say you're 5 or 6 years down the road and now they don't have a charger and it doesn't hold a charge, or the screen's broken, or whatever it is. Why is it medically not working for them anymore? So here's an example. So Mrs. Smith is a 61-year-old female with a medical diagnosis of CVA. She's able to comprehend basic conversational speech, and expressively she is unable to communicate due to severe aphasia. Mrs. Smith is motivated to communicate but lacks the means of useful communication. So you're basically just giving that quick and dirty what's going on, what's her diagnosis, again, severe. So in the anticipated course of impairment, you're just talking about the prognosis of the speech. So explaining their current status and then what you expect to happen relating to the diagnosis. So, if they're autistic and they're nonverbal, or they're ALS and it's progressive in nature, obviously that's not planning. We're not planning on that getting any better. So here's another example. So Johnny has severe dysarthria due to CP. This condition is stable and speech intelligibility is not expected to improve. So they just want to know, obviously, that speech is not expected to improve. If it is, they're going to be like, then why do you need a device? So we have language skills. So here, you're going to describe the level of linguistic impairments as it relates to their ability to use the speech generating device. So you're going to go over any language assessments, scores, reading scores, auditory comprehension, do they require symbols or pictures? So any testing that you've done with their language skills, you're going to put in here. So here's an example of that. So Mr. Smith possesses the linguistic abilities to effectively use an SGD to communicate and achieve functional communication goals. He presents with vocabulary, syntax, and grammar abilities within functional limits. He's able to read and spell with 100% accuracy when motor difficulties are accounted for. Mr. Smith is able to type short words and phrases with the use of a stylus with reduced speed and accuracy due to motoric limitations. So, I mean, you don't have to put in all of your scores. Like you can see that they didn't put in scores here. I've seen SLPs write it both ways, where they put in those scores. Maybe they've done, oh, my mind's going blank, but maybe they've done like language testing and they want to put in those scores. I mean, you can, you don't have to. And then here's where you're going to talk about cognitive skills. So have you done any cognitive testing? So describe their level of cognitive impairment as it relates to their need and ability to use the SGD. So you're just basically describing their memory, attention, problem-solving skills as they relate to using the device. So a good statement that we, have found to have in there is cognitive capacity cannot be accurately assessed due to his or her lack of expressive skills. However, we think he or she reacts at appropriate levels given appropriate interactions with peers and support staff. So as you know, with some of these severe cases who have severe communication needs, it's really difficult to test their cognitive capacity and kind of decide where they're at. So if you can't obviously do any formal testing, you're doing informal testing and you're seeing, can they pay attention? Can they follow these directions? Can they use some problem-solving skills? So again, you don't need to have formal testing scores in here. This can be informal assessment that you're looking at. But the report should state the patient possesses the cognitive linguistic abilities to effectively use an SGD to communicate and achieve functional communication goals. Insurance, again, wants to see that this patient, even if there are cognitive deficits, that they are appropriate to use the SGD. So here's an example of that. So Mr. Smith's attention, memory, and nonverbal problem-solving skills are within functional limits. He sustained attention for a 2-hour evaluation, recalled how to turn on and off an SGD after initial instruction, and independently navigated between 2 pages on an SGD. He has the attention, memory, and problem-solving skills to use an SGD to achieve his functional communication goals. So again, you're not needing those formal scores. You're just doing that formal assessment, informal assessment. And then here's where you're going to talk about physical status. So you're describing the motor skills, ambulatory skill status, positioning, and seating. How will they access the SGD? So can they do direct select? Can they use their finger? Can they use a stylus? Do they need scanning with switches? Can they use a head mouse? Do they need eye tracking? This is where you're talking about just kind of what they look like, their positioning, and all of that. So if ambulatory, you need to document that the person can lift and carry a device of X amount of weight, or who will transport the device if the user cannot. So if you have like this little kid that can't carry it around, is the mom or the dad going to carry it around? Like, what's the plan so that this patient can use it in various circumstances? And I have a tool for that coming up soon. But the report should state the patient possesses the physical abilities to effectively use an SGD and required accessories to communicate. So you're just showing that they have those physical abilities to effectively use everything you're recommending. So here is an example with direct selection with a mount. So Mrs. Female has right hemiplegia and requires the use of a wheelchair. She has functional use of her left hand and arm, which allows her to easily point to and access words and icons on a touchscreen device. Ms. Female possesses the physical abilities required for functional use of an SGD. So this one's pretty straightforward. They can direct select, so not too challenging to write about. Here's where you get into, if you have an eye gaze user, eye gaze is like the tip top, you're ruling everything out, and so it can be pretty lengthy when you're writing about eye gaze because insurance wants to make sure you're ruling out all other cheaper possibilities. So bear with me, this is long. Patient is left hand dominant. He's confined to a power wheelchair for mobility and uses a joystick to control the wheelchair. Patient is able to operate power wheelchair with limited distal control of hand with assistance to position hand onto joystick placed on left side. However, performance is inconsistent from day to day and is unable to use joystick effectively. So the hand is falling off, turning involuntarily due to fatigue and weakness. He's been able to push buttons on the touchscreen. However, due to increased weakness, he's not been able to consistently and accurately press buttons on the screen to meet his communication needs. He was presented with switches, but due to increased weakness in his upper and lower limbs, switch access was ruled out as a viable option. A head mouse was also considered and ruled out due to the patient requiring the speech device to be mounted for optimal positioning of the device for extended use. The patient will need eye control due to physical weakness, which includes inability to use his hands and head movement to select icons on the SGD to meet his daily communication needs. The patient possesses the physical abilities to effectively use an SGD and required accessories to communicate. So again, this breaks down the point that you have ruled out other options. You're not just jumping to eye gaze, but you also want to keep in mind this patient, like it said, he can sometimes use his hand, but it's not a consistent thing and it's not effective consistently all day long for him. So I think that's what you have to keep in mind is your communication that you, or your device that you're recommending, is it going to be a consistent solution for communication needs? Vision status. So you're going to talk about their vision and how it relates to using the SGD. So normal vision all the way to blind. You can talk about acuity, visual tracking, visual field, size of symbols, size of font, number of words, symbols, and spacing. So, if you're working with a CVI kid who can't see and you need those high contrast symbols, that's where you're going to put this in and talk about how they need those high contrast symbols. Do they have left neglect or right neglect? What's their visual field like? Are they needing, extra large symbols, something like that? You do not need to have a formal vision test for this. If there's no special visual needs, you may state that vision is corrected with glasses, for example. The report should state the patient possesses the visual abilities to effectively use an SGD to communicate functionally. So here's an example. So Mr. Smith had a recent vision evaluation and was fitted for glasses due to nystagmus. Mr. Smith demonstrated ability to identify symbols on button-sized 4x4 with 90% accuracy and benefited from use of high contrast images. Acuity is better on right versus left. Mr. Smith possesses visual abilities to effectively use an SGD to communicate functionally. So you're basically going over your field choice here, and like they need a 4x4 field choice, and why those symbols need to be on there. Going to hearing status, you're going to be describing the hearing status relative to using the SGD. Again, you do not need to have a formal hearing screening or hearing test to do this. Obviously, you probably did that if you're working with somebody who you suspect to have hearing deficits anyways. You'll probably want that hearing test, but to go forward with the speech or for the device eval, you don't need that specifically. So you'll talk about localization, understanding of natural speech, understanding speech by the SGD. If hearing impairment is present, describe how the SGD needs to provide visual text for the patient to preview. So if they need to have words to read on the screen, those types of things. And then the report should state the patient possesses the hearing abilities to effectively use an SGD to communicate functionally. So here's an example. A formal and again, a formal audiometric hearing screening was deferred due to the judgment that patient's hearing was adequate for this evaluation. He attended to and discriminated natural and synthesized speech at conversational loudness. He possesses the hearing abilities to effectively use an SGD to communicate functionally. You're going to talk about their daily communication needs. So you're describing the person's daily functional, not just medical communication needs. So you're describing their communication partners, whether, who's around them on a daily basis, their spouse, their family, their different communication environments, home, doctor's office, school, where are they at during the day? Here's an example of this. So Mrs. Smith resides at home with her husband. She must be able to communicate in an emergency situation, for example, calling for assistance. She has a desire to communicate with her adult children, friend, and even speaks with her pastor when she's unable to attend church. It is also necessary for her to obtain necessary medical care and participate in the decision-making process when she meets with her PCP and speech therapist. So you're kind of showing insurance that they have more than one environment that they need to be in, and more than one environment that they need to be able to communicate within. All right, so you've probably gone down the road to get to the point where you're thinking an SGD is appropriate for your patient. You've probably done a lot of this work already prior to me showing up. So why the patient is unable to fulfill daily communication needs using natural speech and non-SGD approaches. So you're going to discuss success of therapy and future prognosis without an SGD. So how does it look if you just continue on the path that you're on without using an SGD? Are they going to make any progress, you think, or are they not? Discuss their ability to use low-tech strategies and natural modes of communication to meet daily needs. So regular speech, natural speech, sign language, writing, PECs, communication boards, those types of things. And then maybe you've tried all these and they're just not a good solution for them. So here's an example of why sign language wouldn't be good for this specific person. So Sign language is not a viable option for communication due to the physical limitations of her and the inability of most communication partners to understand this method of communication. This is not an adequate form of communication for her, as she is limited in her acquisition of signs, and most people in their everyday environment are not competent in sign language. This limits her communication partners and renders her unable to meet her daily communication needs. So you're just ruling out these different areas, and you're showing, why you aren't using that instead of recommending an SGD. Communication goals. So you're going to document 2 to 3 goals that correspond to specific communication needs in these areas. So you have linguistic, operational, social, and strategic. So you're probably thinking, I've never heard of those before if you're new to writing this. So download Pathways app. It is an app you can download onto your iPad. It's free and it has a goals grid in there. So the goals grid looks like this. So you can see you have the linguistic, operational, social, and then there's one more space over there. But you have your emergent, transitional, context dependent, transitional, independent, and independent users. You can click on each of those boxes and it will bring up a goal bank for you. How amazing to have a goal bank as an SLP. So it'll bring up a goal bank for you and you can see what fits for your patient and you can choose from there. But so Pathways is a free app that can be downloaded and it has this in it. It's awesome. It's a great resource. All right, so here's an example or some examples of goals written in the goal grid. So we'll combine 2 or more symbols to indicate medical status needs or emotional state. We'll turn device on in preparation for communication. We'll spontaneously use greetings and farewells by incorporating quickfires. And I don't know why there's an and in there. Rationale device selection. So explain why certain device features are required. So basically, why are you recommending this device? And we'll go over that in a second. So state the person's skills and abilities. So you could say something like, this individual requires a speech generating device with X, Y, and Z, list specific features to meet their functional communication goals. So I created this little tool that I've been giving out to SLPs as they write this report because and this is not an official Tobii Dynavox like tool. This is just something I created for my territory. But so this has been really helpful even to me when SLPs have questions, because if you see, okay, so say you're working with, I'll use like autism for a diagnosis. So say you're working with an autistic kid and he chucks his device across the room and he's broken 8 iPads already and he's spitting on it and throwing water on it and stomping on it all the time, right? So he's pretty rough with it. So you can see, so if you look down the I-110 section all the way at the bottom under durability. So the I-110 has Gorilla Glass, it's been drop tested at 5 feet, and it's waterproof. So if you're looking for a device for that kid, well, this device is made for that population. It's very durable. So you can go back to that, this individual requires a speech generating device with Gorilla Glass and that's been drop tested and is waterproof because he, has all these behaviors that we're working on. And so that's why you're choosing this device. So that's kind of how you want to frame it, is you want to think of, well, what do they need? And is there a device out there that meets those needs? So SGD and accessories recommended. So you're going to list accessories that you're recommending and then justify why. Insurance always wants a justification. So mounts, you can do a floor mount, a wheelchair mount, a tabletop mount. And again, if you're not familiar with mounts, I'm more than happy to help support you with that to order the correct mount. Universal mount. So if you write in a report that a universal mount is recommended, insurance sees universal mount and think in your head 2 mounts. When you say universal mount, it can be a wheelchair mount plus a floor mount, or a wheelchair mount plus a tabletop mount. So basically you get 2 mounts when you're recommending a universal mount. this is where you're recommending key guards, switches, head mouse, or eye gaze. This is something I learned when I started this position too, is like when you're recommending an eye gaze device, so say like the I-12 or the I-15, you're not recommending, or you're not saying that we're not including eye gaze into that device. Eye gaze to insurance is an accessory. It's something that's added on because those devices can be used as a touch screen. And so when you're recommending eye gaze, you're saying that's an accessory that needs to be added. And again, this is a lengthy example because it's eye gaze. Eye gaze is a more lengthy report. I'll tell you that up front. So the gaze interaction will allow Mrs. Smith to access the I-15 Plus using no body movements other than the pupils of her eyes. She has no well-controlled body parts to use other access methods. There are no other options of access other than eye gaze. She does not have head control to access a head mouse accurately or the motor control to use scanning for switch access. He was presented with switches, but due to increased weakness in his upper and lower limbs, lack of motor control, switch access was ruled out as a viable option. A head mouse was also considered and ruled out due to the patient's neck muscles no longer able to support movement of his head. When positioned in his wheelchair, patient's head is placed in the headrest for comfort and support. In addition, the repetitive movement required by switch or head mouse use would encourage overexertion of the muscles and lead to muscle fatigue. Ultimately, productivity and quality of life could be affected. The use of eye gaze as an access method allows the user to maintain the muscles of the head and extremities in a relaxed position while communicating important information with their eye movements. The patient will need eye control due to physical weakness, which includes inability to use his hands and head movements to select icons on the SGD to meet his daily communication needs. The patient possesses the physical abilities to effectively use an SGD and required accessories to communicate. Whew, that was long. So basically you are ruling out all other options and saying why eye gaze is recommended as an accessory and why other things were ruled out, and why you're thinking eye gaze is the best choice. Evaluation trials. So you're going to show that the patient was present and participated in the eval. That's pretty self-explanatory. You're going to discuss other access methods trialed and why they were unsuccessful. So say you tried scanning or a head mouse, any of those, and why they didn't work out. You're going to talk about other SGDs used and or considered and why they weren't appropriate. So I will say this, I feel like a lot of SLPs, and I was this way too, get hung up on that 3 trial thing, like where we feel like we have to trial 3 devices. And that's totally fine. You can choose to do that. But as you learn more about various devices and what they have to offer, I feel like you use your reasoning and your deductive reasoning to figure out what device matches up with that patient. And so where you don't need to trial 3 devices, you have an idea and you trial it out, and if it works, then great, you move forward with it and you say why other options were considered but ruled out. So it's not necessary to try each device. State why it was state why it was considered and then why you ruled it out without a trial. So the report must state, based on the above assessment, it has been determined that the XYZ device is the most appropriate communication device for the patient. So here's an example of thinking about one, but not specifically trialing it. So the type-to-text speech devices were considered but not trialed due to the rigidity and limited motor control of clients' upper extremities. So again, you're considering it, but you're not actually seeing the patient with it because you know it's not going to be a good fit. You have a treatment plan that you're going to talk about. So you're going to address all the communication goals previously stated and the plan for achieving these goals using the SGD. So you're going to talk about the frequency of treatment, the type of treatment, projected frequency of reassessment, and then follow-up requirements. So here's an example of this, and this SLP is recommending speech therapy after the patient receives the SGD. So Upon receipt of SGD, it is recommended that the patient receive 45 minutes of individual therapy and 1 hour of group therapy weekly for 8 weeks, total of 16 sessions. These sessions will address goals listed in Section 4 of this report. An additional 2 hours of training are recommended to train caregivers to program the device. So you're basically just wrapping it all up and saying how you're going to carry this treatment plan forward. So then you're on to your final steps, and you sign the report and you submit it, and then you're done. It's so exciting. So I'm going to ask, I'll ask for questions. I haven't been looking at the chat window, but if you email me at my email address there, danae.morris@tobydynavox.com, and you put in the subject line SLP 18, and you can send the rest of the email blank, just put that SLP 18 in the subject line, you will get all of these resources sent directly to you back. And so that's all you need to write in there, and you will get those resources. So hopefully this has been helpful for some of you out there that have been struggling with this. I know there's been a few. You're not alone if you've been asking lots of questions, know that. But if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer. All right, you guys are quiet. I'll send you your certificates individually after, and thanks for being here.